That is the coolest shirt I have ever seen today. What do you think of the Pulsar, bro?
This thing is literally insane. I kind of see it to believe it, but
yeah,
it's crazy, unreal.
Check, mic check, 1, 2. Howdy guys, Rex here. So we got this new Pulsar thermal imaging scope. This is the Trail XP50. It's quite the unit. You might have been seeing this on the Facebook account, or maybe what's that new deal called? Instagram or something? Where we've been posting some of the pictures of this deal. I've had it for a few weeks now, and I like to really get a good first impression of something before I get too excited about it or start really trying to pretend like I know that it's good or it's bad or being an expert on it. I like to get in some good trigger time on it if I can first. And so this is actually quite the unit. This is what I've been waiting for, man. Like, for years and years and years, technology like this has been way outside the price range of what a guy can afford, particularly when you're talking about high-end thermal stuff where you can actually see and recognize animals at like 1,000 yards for a rifleman, right, in the pitch black dark. That kind of technology just even a couple years ago was like multiple tens of thousands of dollars. And I waited back then to kind of think, okay, I want it to become more heavy-duty, more reliable. I want the batteries to last longer, and I want them to have the high power resolution at more of an affordable price. And in the last couple of years with the advancements in technology, especially in screen displays, like similar to what they use on the cell phones and stuff like that, a lot of that kind of technology has gotten a lot more affordable, and so you can get into a decent scope like this. Now, the Pulsar XP50, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of the flagship version of this line, and this is the big, expensive one, if you will. This is the nice one. This is the one that a guy could use actually, you know, in real life with a rifle and shoot a few hundred yards, right? So this is what I definitely wanted to get my hands on for a long time, and now finally they're kind of available for normal people, and I was able, through OpticsPlanet, to actually get one in for review. They're asking under $5,000, I believe, for these. And if you look on the link at the bottom of the video, it'll give you the exact model I'm looking at, because there's a lot of different stuff out there. And I want to clearly communicate what we got going on with this optic in terms of an initial review. And I plan on shooting this thing quite a bit, because, I mean, when winter comes around, it's going to be dark all the time after a guy gets off of the day job. And so this is going to be kind of my go-to unit probably for quite a while. So we intend to move this around on several different rifles. I got a bolt action configured for this already. This is mounted on a Midwest Industries MI-15. Actually a pretty darn nice rifle. This is a 16-inch barrel with a mid-length gas system. And I wanted something that would be very, very lightweight, but still accurate and built very reliably, or built to be a reliable rifle. And so this is what some of the folks are suggesting to me, some of the guys I know in the industry for the new configurations. And when I took this rifle out of the box, it's like stupidly light. It's like a toy. It's like styrofoam. Even with the bipod on there, the AAC muzzle device, and this thermal on here, it's like really lightweight. So that's exactly what I wanted to happen, because when you start putting tackle on these rifles, they can, get cumbersome. And I just thought it'd be nice to kind of try something like this that would be more balanced like a conventional rifle. Not in terms of having to lug it around and being a whoosh, but in terms of maintaining that kinesthetic balance that a guy can memorize through muscle memory. It's nice to have a rifle similarly balanced to what she has. This is a pretty darn nice rifle. And actually, this rifle, we have called it on the Facebook page, the ultimate Night-Domination Machine. And so we configured this with some night sights. These are made by XS Sights, and they got some fold-ups. They're made by, actually, these are Troy, but they got a tritium insert in the back. And the rear sight, they're nice and low profile. The lockup mechanism is really, really heavy duty. And some of the guys I know that beat the crap out of rifles like this strongly suggested going with a Troy design. I like Midwest Industries pop-up sights as well. That's what I run on a lot of my other stuff, my AR-10 and my Mark 18 I got in the office. But this thing is pretty nice. And we were able to zero them sights at 100. And the rifle, just with open sights at 100, was shooting about like maybe 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. Actually did pretty darn good. And so we got that all configured. And then we got the Pulsar on here. And the way it attaches, so you got these two quick mount levers here. There's a button that kind of retains them. It's adjustable on the other side with the little Allen head. And so you just push that button, and then you flip it over to loosen it up, and flip it over, and it comes off like so. And then you can use this as a monocular or as a sight for another weapon. And there's actually some presets in here that allow you to set it up for a couple different weapons. It'll memorize where it was zeroed for each different rifle, so you can attach it on multiple rifles. But what we did at first with this thing is we ran around the neighborhood and out in the bush, out at the lake, and we just looked at everything. And this actually does have a record button on it. It's like a little camcorder at the same time. So you can actually film yourself shooting stuff or looking at stuff or whatever. And so it was relatively easy to collect a little bit of footage. And I wanted to get a good idea of what different animate targets would look like in different environments, including urban and, rural. And I didn't want to do that run around with an actual rifle on it as to not scare the nuns, right? So we got to be nice and not scare the neighborhood. But we just ran around the thing and did a lot of videotaping. And first thing right off the bat I noticed was that it's actually really, really smartly designed intuitively. There's only a couple buttons on top that run the thing. You got a power button on the side here. And then on the top, you got an M button, which is your modes that'll flip through different screens. And if you hold it in, it'll go to the master screen or whatever they call it. And then you can hit it a couple times. And if you read the instructions, it'll give you the manual on all the different options it has. And you have a select up and a select down. And what I did is I charged the battery. I did read the instructions to do that properly. But then after the thing was charged and I verified that it was turned on, I wanted to wrestle with this without looking at it with too much detail at first. Because that's what a lot of folks are going to do is the manual's pretty thick, man. And if you got a lot of time, you can read that. And if you're a millennial or something and you're into the technology stuff, the manual's certainly going to tell you what's going on. But as a reviewer who's familiar with how a lot of guys operate, including myself, I wanted to just see if I could stumble my way through making this thing work and stumble my way through the menus. And it was a really good exploration process. And I actually learned a lot about this site. And then I went back and I read the manual, especially when it came time to zeroing this on the rifle. I wanted to make sure I did that in a safe way. And so then I read through it and I thought, okay, yep, that's kind of what I figured. But there is a lot of really, really cool features in this site that make it very usable in a wide variety of different thermal contrast environments. The way this thing works is it sees basically heat, okay? Heat will actually put off electromagnetic radiation just like visible light, except it's not visible. It's a lower wavelength, and it's not visible to the naked eye, but in the right optic, it's giving off a form of light that you can't see unless you use something like this. Some other critters, like some insects and stuff like that, see more towards the infrared zone, right? Or the infrared end of the spectrum. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. That's why some of these units are called FLIRs, forward-looking infrared, okay? And so the way it works is different items have different emissivities, right? Like cloth is going to have an emissivity value, perhaps, if it's made out of cotton, of like around the 80. So is vegetation on a tree, because cloth and vegetation is kind of almost the same deal as cotton is a plant, right? If you look at a rock, it might have a very low value in the 40s, 30s, depends on what kind of rock. Metal, aluminum, steel can be much lower than that. And an animate target like a human skin or rubber or different materials like black rubber like here is going to have a very high value in the 90s or even the upper 90s. And so this thing sees contrast in heat values in what they call emissivity. So if you want to camouflage yourself against something like this, you have to be aware of the emissivity values of the different things you're going to be trying to blend in with, right? And so that's why, for example, some of the burlap-style ghillie suits and ghillies that take into account a lot of the stuff rather than the nylon-based stuff or the plastic-based stuff can really give you a really big thermal contrast against the background. Without getting into that, that'll be a review for a later day, perhaps, maybe on a more secure platform where we know who's watching. But we got... This scope does a very good job at balancing that kind of stuff out. So, for example, if there are certain animals like with fur, and they're in a background that's the fur is kind of insulating them, you can adjust the contrast in here. You can adjust the brightness. You can adjust a whole lot of different parameters digitally, just like in a modern digital camera, except in the thermal zone, right? That end of the electromagnetic spectrum, and you can actually adjust it to make the contrast pop out more, or if it's too contrasty, because it's making it harder to see, then you can back off on it and have more of a standard night vision style look. So you have a whole huge wide variety of different ways you can adjust this based on your environment. And it does have preset modes. I believe it has like forest mode, which we used a little bit. It has rock mode, and then it has some automatic modes, semi-automatic modes, not for machine guns or whatever, but for in terms of like auto contrast kind of stuff. And you can adjust all those settings just by flipping through the menu. It also has a feature set, which is it starts off on 1:8 power, and it digitally zooms in out to like 12.8 power. And you don't gain a lot. You don't gain any kind of sharpness when you zoom in, but it will show you kind of what you're aiming at a little better. And the reticle, you can place it a little better on the target if you zoom in with it. There's so many features on the scope. It would take me an hour or two to kind of go over, but I'm just trying to give you my first impressions of it, just walking through how cool this deal was. But I think it's probably appropriate to go over some of the basic features so that we all kind of know what we're looking at. The resolution on this particular unit is 640 by 480. Which is actually pretty respectable, especially by standards that I was used to back a few years ago when I'd see these things elsewhere being used. And that's a pretty decent resolution. That's where you can really start to see detail and stuff. You can recognize a human face at a close range. You can see little bunny rabbits hopping around at 100 yards and identify them. You can see a deer at 1,000 yards and notice that it is a four-legged animal that looks like a deer, right? So it's a good resolution. And because the resolution is high enough, you do have a variable magnification range of 1.8 to 12.8 power because you have enough pixels. I don't know if they use pixels or what, but you can zoom in on that display digitally, and yet actually it'll benefit you a little bit. It also has a detection distance on objects like animate targets of up to 1,800 meters. And actually, that is true. You can definitely detect stuff. We're driving around in the pitch black dark. I could see moths at a couple hundred yards above the lake. We saw ducks. I know how wide that lake is at that spot, but it's 800 to 900 yards away. You can see them floating on the water. Likewise, there were some geese, I think, sitting on the water out there. You could recognize it as a waterfowl bird sitting on the lake in the pitch black dark. If you're looking at large mammals, you can see them. We saw some deer. I got some footage of them right around probably 1,000 yards or so. And it was pretty cool because if you're utilizing the reticle in the scope for your holdover values, they do have a selection of reticles we'll go into in a minute, you could actually shoot that far if you got enough mils in your scope, which you would on this thing. So you could potentially use this for long-range shooting, dependent on whether or not you could clearly identify the target. It has 3 different zeroing profiles with 15 different distances, so you can set it up for different rifles. It'll memorize the rifle, and I'll tell you how it zeroes in just a minute. It has really, really good image definition. Like I said before, they did a good job. There's a focus knob up on top here. This is a very important thing, and there's another focus in the back to get everything else in focus. But you gotta, at distance, if it appears blurry, you gotta turn this and you gotta focus. But once you get zeroed in, it is incredibly good quality for an over-the-counter thermal like this that you can use in a rifle scope. And it does utilize 50 hertz high image frequency, which is nice because it's in a more of a real-time fashion. When you have animate targets and you're trying to lead a moving target, you'd be surprised how much ground something can cover or just move, and it could zigzag on you or something. Animate targets are very, very hard to track when they're moving, and so a high frequency hertz, 50 hertz, that means 50 frames per second if I'm not mistaken, is going to give you a lot better ability to track animate targets. And it also has a high recoil resistance, so you can run this on semi-autos and stuff. I have this on the AR. Typically, semi-autos will have a little bit more slamming on optics because you got slamming rearward and forward, and they can rattle stuff apart. But these were designed for duty rifle scopes and chasing hogs around and bouncing around in a truck and shooting out the window if you're hog hunting in Texas or whatever they're allowed to do down there. I don't think there's any laws in Texas, so you could probably do it however you want. And then there's also 10 electronic reticles. And that was kind of neat, just paging through the different reticles. Some of them like a very tiny dot. Some of them are conventional duplex style, or they have a whole variety of them. And the ones that I actually liked, let me see, I printed up these reticles here. They have the mil-dot style reticle, but the interesting thing is, and this is maybe one of my questions I would have for the guys at Pulsar who designed the reticles, is they're set up in very goofy increments in terms of how they define them to be on their paperwork. The values between major hash marks are not like even values, and they show them in minutes of angle and centimeters, but they're not in like exact even increments. So, there's one of them that lines up to be kind of a milrad-based reticle. 3.5 inches at 100 meters is approximately 1 mrad, right? And so that's the reticle that I choose to utilize. But if I had to ask any questions, I'd like them to more clearly define what they have going on in terms of instructions when you're talking about the reticles. And I think that digitally, there's no reason they couldn't, maybe on a future model or a future generation of this kind of scope, to digitally have a first focal plane option, because it'd be very easy to implement in there because it's all digital display anyways. The way this reticle works, it's interesting. The mode that I found on here after screwing around with it was that it has a picture-in-picture mode. I like to retain the 1.8, the lowest power setting, because that's your highest resolution, and you're seeing the maximum field of view, because you can have a wide array then. And in the pitch black, you can't rely on your non-shooting eye to kind of see what's going on, or, if you have the rifle down, you can't see. You're going to have to be looking through this thermal in order to even see what's going on. And I want maximum field of view. But then if you want to aim at something, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of magnification, so you can put the reticle on the center of the target exactly. And they have a picture-in-picture display. So you can put a little... It shows you what the middle of the crosshairs is doing on a little window up top on center, which is actually really nice, because then you can track moving targets. You can maintain not peripheral awareness, but you can maintain a wider field of awareness in your target zone. And still at the same time, you have that little picture up there so you can see exactly where your crosshairs are at. And that'll help you to find the target. Otherwise, if you were zoomed in, like on, let's say, 10 power, for example, in the pitch black dark, if you're not exactly pointed at the target, you're never going to find it. So you almost have to have that feature. You have to have it all the way backed off so you can even find them animate targets. And then it's nice to have that ability to be zoomed in on it at the same time. So that worked out really slick. That's a really good feature. And it's nice the picture-in-picture deal will actually zoom in on the reticle as well, so that you won't lose your stadiometric functions of the reticle hash marks. And so whatever that reticle you're using will be the same. It'll zoom in on it. So it's almost like a first focal plane concept. There's no focal planes on something like this per se, but you know what I'm saying. So that's something that I thought was a good design. Otherwise, if you digitally zoom in on it, it's more of a, just as at a loss for words, a second focal plane type situation where you're zooming in and the reticle stays the same. So now those, if you plan on using those hash marks, you only can really use them at one power setting. Otherwise, every time you change the power setting, they're going to move around. Unless you're using the picture-in-picture function, which is actually pretty slick. So the different reticles, you can look through those when you get the optic. I can maybe show you some pictures of the ones I flipped through, but they're pretty darn cool, man. And like I said, it has a built-in video recorder. Now, the video recorder does not do this thing justice, in all honesty, because when you're looking at it, when I put the video onto the computer, I'm looking at it on a big screen. And so it's almost way bigger than what you're seeing in here, because when you're looking through here, you're not seeing a giant, whatever, 12-inch or 16-inch wide computer screen. You're seeing a very small image. So the actual sharpness of your image in terms of how it's perceived in the eye is a lot more sharp and a lot more impressive in person than it is when you spread out that whole giant image onto a video camera screen or a TV screen. And so if it looks a little bit grainy, that's really, really expanding that view. Because when you're looking through here, it's like you would see through a rifle scope. You have a little square screen on the inside, but it's very, very sharp in person. So that the video mode did not do it justice for how it actually is, for how it's actually perceived in the field. It's also mobile friendly. It has iOS, Android stuff going on. I don't know what that means. It's remote control, actually. And it has live internet streaming. That's the kind of stuff that's beyond Rex. Like, that'll have to be some younger guy or some computer nerd type guy will have to do that part of the review. But it has a lot of stuff in it. There's a lot of technology. It's also got a cool detachable battery. You flip this lever up here. Let me show you. So if you flip this lever up right here, this battery comes straight out. And it has two like terminal posts, kind of like on a car battery. And these batteries are awesome. They're rechargeable and an outlet. And you can actually hold a lot of battery power in this sucker. I was playing with it for 2 weeks straight and didn't have to recharge it. I mean, I wasn't doing all night, but I was playing with it, handing it around to guys in the yard. We're sitting in the garage, having a brewski, just chilling and passing it around the scope. And it was pretty neat to see that, you know, a lot of these run goofy batteries, a lot of the night vision stuff, especially back in the day, like what I remember we used to use. And it's like nice to have a rechargeable option. And they make an extra battery too as well that is quite a bit bigger. So you can get spare batteries, but you just plug that in and that deal secures the post. It kind of pinches it in there. So I like the lockup design of the battery. The terminals are definitely look like they're designed smart. So a lot of the other more intricate designs I've seen in terms of battery lockup, I think this is a better design. So I wouldn't see it like being easy to corrode or having problems with that part like maybe some of the other ones do. It also has a stadiometric rangefinder. So basically you go to one screen by going through the option and it has a set of two lines and it'll widen and shorten. And it'll have a couple different critters off to the side. It'll give their average height values. And so when you bracket whatever critter you're looking at, whether it be a deer, if you get them to sit in there, it'll tell you off to the side on the deer picture, if this is a deer you're bracketing, this is how far it is, if that deer is of average height, which we have on the reticle. And I think it has a hog or some other critters in there that you can range, you know. So for hunting type applications, that's pretty slick. And if you wanted to transfer that over to other applications, you can just memorize how high those animals are. But that's actually a pretty cool feature because sometimes in the dark, in the pitch black, you're not going to be able to use your normal laser rangefinder very easily, right? Because you're not going to be able to see what the heck you're pointing at. So it's nice to have that in the optic. Pretty slick. And it's fully waterproof, so you can actually get it wet. I don't know if I'd go scuba diving with it, but it'll hold its own in water. And it has a wide range of operating temperatures. I think it's good for like 50 degrees Celsius to like negative something Celsius. So this is intended to be used in the field, in real life. It's even got little cooling fins on the side here, which is pretty darn slick. And it has a fully functioning wireless control unit. Again, that's something for a younger guy to review. And it has a display off mode, so it won't just burn up batteries. It'll kind of go into sleep mode and you hit it again, and it'll turn back on for you. And it also has a user-friendly interface. I got to say that's true. At first, it was a little bit intimidating. I hate electronic technology. I hate it. But this thing actually was easy to drive, even for an old dinosaur like me. And so that was pretty neat. And you can update the software. So you can plug this thing in to the computer, which is crazy to me. You can plug your scope into the computer and you can update stuff. So if they ever do come out with some of them cool reticle designs that I was hinting at, or some of these other upgrades you're going to find later one day, that's pretty cool. You can upload it in there potentially, right? And so the neat thing about this too that I like with thermals in general, you can watch some of my other night vision discussions I had. You cannot beat a thermal in terms of finding stuff in the dark. If you want to find something that's putting off kind of heat, like if there's dudes trying to sneak up on your position, or hogs, or like, ever see that movie Critters from the 80s? If those little critters are trying to sneak up on your farmstead, like in that movie, you would definitely see them sneaking. There would be no sneaking. They would not hide. That's something that your standard starlight light amplification technology is not going to be as good at. The thermal is definitely going to see it, assuming those space alien critters have a standard biology, to where they're putting off body heat. I would assume they would. They got fur on them and stuff, so probably some kind of space mammal. But at any rate, too much fun. We got to do movie reviews. That would be fun, talking about the movies. In terms of locating targets, this thing is going to be pretty much awesome. And actually, it's of a sharp enough quality in terms of resolution. It's really effective also for identifying those targets. If you're hunting an animal, you should have a pretty darn good idea that that's a hog or not, or that it's a rabbit or it's a squirrel. It's pretty good. Even out to a couple 100 yards on small animals, you should be able to pretty clearly identify them. That's how good you can see with this. When you're at 1,000 yards, you start to, now you're looking at medium-sized animals. You'll definitely notice that it's a human or that it's a deer instead. Now, for responsibility's sake, as a sportsman or even as a soldier, you're not going to want to engage targets for sure unless you know what you're shooting at, right? So a lot of guys like to run thermal to locate targets and then night vision to kill them. And that's a good way to go. But if you're hunting hogs, you're going to pretty much know that you're shooting at a hog. Or if there's just guys at pretty close range, like within 50 yards, you might even recognize their face with this thing. So it's of good enough quality to where you can start to recognize the target. When I was looking around, I had some of the dudes I know running in circles out there so I could zero in on them with the scope without the rifle attached. And it was pretty cool because you could recognize the dude with the optic, So my initial review of this was very positive, actually. This is really cool. This is a treasure for the arsenal. This is worth the investment, I think. And zeroing, let's talk about zeroing real quick. I did mount it on this Midwest Industries. It was relatively intuitive. It was actually pretty simple. And that was what I was dreading because I hate reading through instruction manuals. And I only had to read like 10% of it. And I was like, oh, I get it. It's on a XY axis, and it has a little thing. And then you basically put your reticle where you're on the center of the target, and then you move this little X using the little menu and the arrows in here. You move the little X to go where that bullet was, and then you save it, and then it adjusts fire. And I spent about, I would say, 100 rounds of Fiochhi ammunition in this 223 to get it perfectly zeroed at 100. Because you got to start off at close range. I started off at 25 meters. I was on the box. And then you got to use something with thermal contrast to zero it, like tape, because it's not going to recognize ink on paper very well because it's thermal contrast. It's not visible light contrast. So different materials are going to put off different thermals. And so I use some duct tape, which ain't ideal, actually. The way we used to do it is you would use a piece of electrical tape. That really is a nice, thin line. So if you put an X on a piece of paper at 100 yards with electrical tape on it, you would see that very easily. I just had to use what I had in the truck. So I normally have electrical tape. I don't know where it went. But it was relatively easy to zero. And to adjust To make micro adjustments, you just do one click over on the XY axis. It actually gives you the digital readout in the upper right-hand corner of the optic, which is pretty cool because it'll tell you exactly where you're at in terms of that. And then you can save that in the settings so that it remembers that rifle. And then when I take this off this sweet Midwest Industries rifle and I throw it on my bolt action, right, with the silencer on it, yes, I said silencer. Ask me about that sometime. But you can memorize where it was zeroed for that deal too. And you can put it on your 1022 or whatever you wanted to, and the mounting brackets are about right, in my opinion, for AR height. It's not super high. It's a little bit on the lower side of comfortable, but it's about right for most people, I bet you. And so I didn't have any problem. I think this is perfectly situated for like a rail on an AR. It did utilize a forward part of the rail here. So I'll put that back on there like that. And then we'll just flip this on until she snips on. And I haven't done a full battle test yet of the repeatability, although when I did take it off and play with it and put it back on, it was pretty much right in the same spot. I didn't quantify that yet for you guys. As I review this more, it's hard to do that without using it a lot, because what's going to happen is the aluminum on the rails is going to have some deformation as you pinch stuff on and off of it. The finish is going to wear out a little bit, so they might loosen up a little bit over time. You might have to adjust it a little more. But I want to get a good general overview of how this puts up with taking off, detaching, and attaching over and over again before I give you my opinion on how I think it'll do, because I have no idea. But just from being crisp and brand new and everything, it went on, it went off, and it went back on, and it pretty much didn't lose zero. It was like, I don't know, within half an inch at 100 yards or something like that. So pretty darn good. And it's a light unit. It actually doesn't take up a huge amount of area like some of the other dinosaur units did. It's actually relatively lightweight considering what you think it would be. And it's built good. It looks like a heavy duty kind of plastic on there that is built out of polymer, molecules and such. But definitely something that a guy should probably have. And every single person I let play with this thing up to this point had their mouth hanging open. And they're just like, yep, I need to sell my motorcycle and get that. And you will win in the dark if you have something like this. There's no doubt about it. This is finally catching up with some of the high-end military technology from a few years ago. And so the civilian stuff's always quite a bit behind. And now the military stuff is way out there in quality. It's really incredible. But this is finally hitting that point to where you can really use it for stuff. I mean, this is actually pretty nice. So check out that link I got on the bottom of the video in the commentaries, okay? I'm putting the links in the commentaries now. People don't find them in the description. So look in the commentaries there. I'll put a thumbs up on it or something, and you guys can check it out. And this is something that's probably worth it, in my opinion. You got to have some kind of good, decent night vision. There's no way to beat a thermal if you're doing perimeter defense and you want to catch the little critters sneaking up on the place. So as time goes on, we're going to change this around. We're going to put on different rifles, and we will see how she does. But stay posted for more reviews. I hope that gave you a basic introductory idea of what we're looking at here. And this is definitely approved by Rex. I do think it's pretty dang sweet. All right, guys, thanks a bunch. We'll catch you on the next one.
But she hits me, disassembles my leg. So I went to the doctor and he gave me a leg. Now she waits, slumber, just dreaming, piggyback. Hope that she kills instead of leaving the name. No, she's a minefield. She'll botch your body from your soul. Minefield, leave a big smoking hole.